This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, is Evan Jansen. This show is very much live. It's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We are also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. On the show today, we're back at the North Gauteng High Court shortly for a ruling on the appeals procedure for Oscar Pistorius. Hopefully we'll take that live straight after our show. We're also hoping to go to the Western Cape High Court, where the EFF will attempt to reverse the suspension of 12 of their MPs from the National Assembly. The 16 days of activism campaign ends today. Have we learned anything? What do you think? At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your views. We'll close by talking to Mzilikazi wa Afrika in our book slot. His book, Nothing Left to Steal. But first, let's get today's news from Katrine Malak.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Malan, and let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. Judge Thokozile Masipa will today hand down her ruling in the appeal case of the conviction and sentencing of Oscar Pistorius in the Pretoria High Court. Earlier, defence lawyer Barry Roo argued that Masipa's application of the law was correct, adding that the state had no basis on which to appeal. The state has launched its application to have the athlete's culpable homicide conviction and sentence appealed in the Supreme Court in Bloemfontein. Pistorius was sentenced to 5 years in prison for shooting his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year.
The court did not take account of the fact that in terms of Section 2761I, the accused would only serve an incarceration period of 10 months, and that is shockingly inappropriate to what the accused have done.
Eskom is appealing to consumers to contact them if load shedding schedules are inaccurate. People have complained about power outages that don't coincide with Eskom's published schedule. South Africans have been experiencing regular rolling blackouts for several weeks due to limited generating capacity and several problems that have occurred at existing power plants.
My calculations for a month of this sort of load shedding and problems would come down to about 1.5 billion rands of value add lost. So that means that after 4 months, you would have exactly the same impact on the economy.
Gauteng traffic police have warned road users to expect traffic volumes to increase today due to schools which officially close for the December holidays. Motorists are urged to be vigilant and adhere to the traffic laws to prevent accidents. There will be increased visible policing and several roadblocks on major routes in Gauteng. And Zimbabwe's ruling party's newly appointed Central Committee will meet for the first time today. It comes barely a day after veteran ruler Robert Mugabe sacked his vice president and several ministers over an alleged coup plot. The decision ends the speculation about the fate of Majuro once Mugabe's apparent heir, but it also renews questions about the future of the party. Mugabe is expected to announce his national executive and vice presidents by tomorrow. Remember, all those are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you, Katrina. Top story today, the state will know shortly whether it will be granted leave to appeal the sentence handed out to Oscar Pistorius. It's called for a harsher sentence, arguing that the one meted out was astonishing. Pistorius is serving 5 years for culpable homicide after he shot and killed his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp.
The state believes Oscar Pistorius got off lightly and want a harsher sentence imposed.
There was an innocent woman shot and killed in the most horrendous circumstances.
It argued that his sentence does not fit the crime.
The court did not take account of the fact that in terms of Section 2761I, the accused would only serve an incarceration period of 10 months, and that is shockingly inappropriate to what the accused have done.
The prosecution criticised the court for believing the athlete's version riddled with flaws and that Masipa misinterpreted the law.
If the court has wrongly applied the principle of dolus eventualis, a conviction of murder would be inescapable.
The state also believes the court did not take into account all the evidence, but the defense dismissed this.
Every single point raised by the state in its application, why the court erred and that the court failed to take into account, we show in the record that the court in fact took those factors into account.
Rue also argued that the state has no basis for appeal as it based its arguments on questions of fact and not law. The decision now rests with Judge Thokozile Masipa. A ruling in favor of the state could see this matter sit before the Supreme Court of Appeals. But if she does reject the application by the state, the National Prosecuting Authority will petition the Appeals Court. Criselda Lewis, SABC News, at the North Gauteng High Court.
Yeah, that's Criselda Lewis. She's been covering this story for the last year or so and doing a fantastic job. Of course, she's outside the North Gauteng High Court right now. Let's go to Criselda. Good morning, Criselda. Nice to be with you again.
Well, a very good morning to you, Eben.
Criselda, I know there's not much new to report. Everyone's expecting this judgment today, but just give us the broad strokes. How do you see it today?
Well, even certainly what we're all looking to this morning is what Judge Thokozile Masipa's decision will be regarding the state's application for leave to appeal the conviction and sentence. Certainly what many experts are saying is that there needs to be some clarification with regard to the application of the law. You'll know that Judge Thokozile Masipa has come under intense scrutiny over application of the law regarding dolus eventualis, whether Oscar Pistorius intended to shoot Reeva Steenkamp or not. So really what we saw the state do yesterday was to try and get Judge Thokozile Masipa to not admit per se, but to make her realize that a higher court would come to another conclusion relating to Oscar Pistorius' conviction and sentence. As you rightfully pointed out, they're looking for a harsher sentence and are saying that they believe that the Supreme Court of Appeals would come to a different decision. What Gary now says he's basing this application on as well is that a precedent has been set here which should really be reversed or clarified in a higher court. He raised questions regarding, for example, to say that if the court did find that Oscar Pistorius had been grossly negligent when he pulls the trigger, and if that borders on dolus eventualis, why then would Oscar Pistorius get 5 years in prison? What then would happen in a case where the offence was much lesser? What precedent would that then set? He also went on to point out to the court that, saying to the court that there were crucial aspects of the case that were ignored regarding the extent of culpability that Oscar Pistorius should have assumed responsibility for, say that the court should have really taken that into account. Of course, then we saw the defence really dismissing all of that, pointing out that they believe that the court had taken out, or rather taken into consideration all the evidence that was put before it and had basically arrived at the appropriate decision.
Criselda, we're heading into the holiday season now here in South Africa. Just tell us, once leave to appeal is either granted or rejected, how do you see this process proceed for the rest of the year and into the new year?
Well, basically what will happen, Eben, is that if Judge Thokozile Masipa does rule in favor of the state and grants them leave to appeal, this would mean that this case then will go and sit before the Supreme Court of Appeal, but that will not happen at least until maybe June next year, certainly to grant the defense as well an opportunity for it to prepare its case. And you might even see, for example, if Judge Thokozile Masipa does rule in favor of the state, you might see the defense or Oscar Pistorius himself reapplying for bail. Then Oscar Pistorius might be out on bail as the defense does prepare its case. But what we do know is that if Judge Thokozile Masipa does not, or is not persuaded of the fact that a higher court will come to a different conclusion, she will then decline this request by the state, and then we know that the National Prosecuting Authority will then petition petition the Supreme Court of Appeal if it does not agree with Judge Thokozile Masipa's decision today. Of course, if she declines or rather indicates that she does not think that another court will come to another conclusion or impose a harsher sentence on Oscar Pistorius.
Thank you very much, Griselda Lewis. That's Griselda. Give us a little update as to how the matter will proceed this morning. Of course, Griselda has been doing updates regularly on Twitter and, of course, on this platform for the last couple of days. Court will be live shortly after past. We're hoping to take it live, but let's take your comments first. Lebogang Ramaboya says, Judge Thokozile Masipa has a chance to redeem herself today and all else will be forgiven. Talking about the Oscar trial. Well, she's just got to give leave to appeal, my friend, that's all. Let's hope today goes well. Hashtag Oscar Pistorius. Aaron Murphy says, regardless of Masipa's ruling today, Null will likely still take the appeal forward to a higher court. I think that is the onus is on the MPA to do that, Aaron. Tabu Mitsuneng says, I don't think Judge Masipa is going to allow the prosecution to get what they want. That one from Tabo. And then final one from Becky Chris, who says, the Oscar trial, every time I look at Judge Thokozile Masipa, I can't help but feel it's like talking to a wall. She has already made up her mind. Of course, the appeals procedure will be live on this very channel in less than half an hour. We'll go straight there. Of course, another matter before the courts today. South African politics will move to an unfamiliar place. That is from Parliament to the court, as economic freedom fighters embark on a legal action in an attempt to reverse the suspension of 12 of their MPs from the National Assembly. The Western Cape High Court will hear an urgent application by the EFF challenging sanctions against the MPs. Notice of motion, among others, to interdict Parliament for suspending the salaries and allowances of 20 EFF members for their role in disrupting proceedings of the National Assembly was served on Monday. Parliament has indicated that they will oppose the application. Now, for the latest and an update, let's cross to our reporter at the Western Cape High Court, is Bulelani Phillip this morning. Good morning to you, Bulelani. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you, Eben, and to the viewers.
An interesting day. You are not at Parliament today. You're at courtside. A little bit different. Just tell us about your expectation today, Bulelani.
Well, Eben, as you know, that in less than just half an hour from now, the Western Cape High Court will be hearing this application that has been brought by the EFF. Basically, they are taking the National Assembly Speaker, Ms. Baleka Mbete, as well as the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Jacob Zuma, as well as the Chairperson of the Powers and Privileges Committee. Basically, in the main, they want the court on one end to interdict Parliament from implementing these sanctions that have been meted against these 20 EFF MPs. And on the other hand, they are also seeking to review the decision that has been adopted by the National Assembly to mete out these sanctions against the 20 EFF MPs. Now, you'd recall last month, 6 MPs were actually fined 30 days' salary as well as a month suspension from Parliament. Another 6 were fined 14 days of their salary docked and half of the month as well, under suspension. And the remainder of those MPs, they've actually been ordered to issue public apologies to Parliament, and they as well will be, getting, doctors' remuneration for up to a period of 14 days. So today's proceedings are really meant to test, the impartiality of Parliament in coming to those decisions that were taken in the National Assembly.
The loss of income seems to really hit home, especially at this time of the year. Has this been a difficult patch for the EFF, and do you expect them to maybe tone it down a little bit from here on in Parliament?
Well, what I can say, Eben, at this moment, the sanction that has actually been effected with immediate effect is the suspension from Parliament. With regards to the issue of remuneration, that will only come into effect mid-month on the 15th, so that has not really run its course. But of course, this urgent application is actually seeking to ensure that Parliament does not dock those salaries, because in their application, the EFF has made it clear that the decision that has been taken by the National Assembly is very harsh and vindictive, because it comes over this Christmas period where people are supposed to be spending time with their families, and therefore they are saying that the implementation of that has been timed to ensure that, you know, it has this kind of vindictive, as they put it, attribute to the EFF members. Whether the EFF members are going to tone down with regards to, you know, their actions in Parliament, I think from statements that we've seen made in the House, the leader of the EFF has made it very clear that, you know, these kinds of action are not going to deter them, because he's saying that money is not that important to them. For them is to ensure that they continue to play this, opposition style of politics that is going to ensure that the issues that they are raising are in the front burner.
Democracy at work. What are the analysts saying about this action in the court? Is it the judiciary keeping the legislature honest? Is that what the thinking is?
Yes, as you have said, Eben, the central issue that is going to emanate from this court case is this whole issue of whether the judiciary has that, extended role of ensuring that it reverses the decisions that have been taken in the National Assembly. What we've seen earlier in a similar application by the EFF, the issue of the doctrine of the separation of powers is one of the issues that are going to be the legs of argument. But of course, on the other hand, the EFF has made it quite clear that, the judiciary is not called upon, to adjudicate on these matters only because they feel that way. But they are saying that they are not getting a fair hearing when it comes to issues in the National Assembly, given that, the presiding officers there are senior members of the ANC, and therefore it seems what they are arguing is that they take orders from, the ANC headquarters, and some of the decisions that are taken there are actually predetermined decisions. And therefore what they are saying is that they want an independent person who's going to be able to adjudicate on the facts that are before them without fear or favor.
Bulelani, thank you very much for that update. Coming to you live from the Western Cape High Court. Of course, Bulelani Philip is there today. Interesting case. South African politics, in a way, moves to the Western Cape High Court as the EFF is challenging their suspension from the National Assembly. But let's take a quick look at the front pages from around the rest of the world. What's happening elsewhere in the United Kingdom? The Times there says that CIA agents should be charged. This is a report by the US Congress revealed in grim detail how naked, chained and sleep-deprived detainees were subjected to interrogations by CIA agents for weeks at a time. On the mainland, in Spain, papers are looking at that same story of the US facing calls to prosecute those CIA agents responsible for implementing extreme torture techniques. And down under in Australia, the Daily Telegraph has a picture of David Warner paying tribute to his fallen comrade Phil Hughes after a cracking 145-run display in the first test against India in Adelaide yesterday. Just before we go to an ad break, let's take a quick look at what's happening across the country today. In Johannesburg, the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry will release the November 2014 Trade Condition Survey. In Boksburg, Nathaniel Katleho Mboku will appear in court in connection with the murder of a 3-year-old Cuban van Wyk. Moving to Cape Town, the Young Communist League of South Africa will start with its 4th National Congress at the University of the Western Cape. Staying in the mother city, arguments will be heard in an application challenging the suspension of those 12 EFF MPs from the National Assembly, as we've just heard from Bulelani Philip. Time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
You fled to Canada.
Goes to get it.
No people.
De groeimakers en kaps. Ja, de park bezig. Kom.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom. Today marks the end of the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children campaign. Since the annual campaign started on the 25th of last month, a number of serious issues of abuse and violence against our country's most vulnerable have been placed in the spotlight. The worldwide campaign aims to ultimately rid society of abuse permanently. However, the success of this campaign rests on our daily actions to safeguard our society against a cycle of abuse. We asked the question today, with the 16 days having now run its course, what happens for the remaining days of the year? And joining us today to further this discussion is Nadia Albino, the Deputy Representative of UNICEF South Africa. Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you too.
16 days, it ends today, but UNICEF has a global end violence initiative. Tell us about that and how it connects with South Africa and the continent.
Okay, well, you know, UNICEF is a global organization. It's a UN organization that draws its mandate from the Convention of the Rights of the Child. UNICEF is based in over 190 countries globally. And having done some investigation and collected some data across the globe, they realized that the levels of abuse against children and violence against children globally is extremely high. So basically what the organization then did, said, why don't we work with all the countries all over the world where UNICEF does exist to see how we can end this scourge of violence against children.
We see in South Africa a lot of real terrible headlines, babies being raped, chopped up at times, women being killed, very high-profile cases. Where does South Africa fit in this picture? Do we have a bigger problem than most? You mentioned it's a global scourge. Do we have a bigger problem here in South Africa than elsewhere?
Well, the problem globally is huge. It's even worse in conflict areas. But given that South Africa is supposedly a country at peace, the children in this country are actually in a state of war because there's a lot of attack against them. So I think if you look at the levels of violence in South Africa compared to the rest of the world, of course the Latin Americas are much higher. But South Africa, levels of violence against women and children are extremely high. And what we see on the media most probably is the tip of the iceberg. It's not actually, the real story.
Is it a case of a lot of this being underreported in South Africa and elsewhere?
Well, you see, violence is a very strange atrocity. A lot of it happens behind closed doors. A lot of the perpetrators are known to their victims, etc. So a lot of times these cases are not reported. And that's why the campaign that UNICEF has launched is saying, let's make the invisible visible. So that we begin to talk about it, we begin to act against it, and we begin to galvanize society to deal with this scourge.
We do these campaigns every year.
Yeah.
But it seems as if the levels of violence, it doesn't really come down. Is it not maybe time for us to change direction or think maybe a little bit differently about how do we target this problem?
That's precisely what we're trying to do. We're saying that this is an everyday thing. It is not about 16 days or it's not about a particular day, etc. Violence is happening at our doorsteps, in our neighbors' homes, in our bedrooms, in our lounges every single day. Now we have to deal with this on a daily basis. When you look at the legislative environment in South Africa, that is really, it's quite a strong legislative environment.
Yeah.
How do you translate that to action? How do we ensure that people understand what the law says and how the law can actually protect them? How do we work with the law so that the law really begins to these issues and begin to deter other perpetrators? So basically what we're saying in UNICEF is UNICEF can't do this alone. The government of South Africa cannot do this alone. The media cannot do this alone. The civil society cannot do this. Each and every single South African is responsible. We should not turn a blind eye when we see violence meted against children. We must act.
And is that the message then for us to be activists, not just during this period, but throughout the year?
Throughout our lifetime, we must make sure that every child is safe, secure, and protected. It is our responsibility. It's incumbent upon us.
Well, thank you for joining us today. 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. It ends today. But activism never ends. Thank you for joining us today. That's Ms. Nadia Albino, the Deputy Representative of UNICEF South Africa. Let's have a look at your views. What are you talking about on social media? At SABC Newsroom, of course, that's where we are. Calvin Mupungu says, we were brought up being told of how educated Mugabe is. Shocked to hear he sacked Mujuru for breaching a non-existent section of the bill. That one coming out of Zimbabwe, I would think. Kudzanai Musengi says, sacked Vice President Mujuru says she asked for an audience with Mugabe over treason allegations, but was never given a chance. That one from Kudzanai. Tina says, mixed feelings on Majuru's sacking. Still not sure about mine, but one thing for sure, she did nothing for our lot, so tough luck. Oh, that's very harsh, isn't it? Elias Sibanda says, he who appoints can disappoint. Hashtag Majuru. Yes, it's Zimbabwean politics foremost on people's mind. Very, very interesting take on that kind of procedure. Well, now we're shifting gears a little bit. It's time for our book slot. And this week, interesting book. Lovely, actually, a wonderful cover, very emotive. Nothing Left to Steal is a tell-it-all memoir by the multi-award-winning investigative journalist Mzilikazi wa Afrika. In the book, Wa Afrika looks at some of the most controversial political issues, including one particular case that had, media freedom in South Africa under scrutiny. His unwarranted arrest followed. The book also touches on corrupt activities that involve some of the most senior officials in government. Now, to tell us more about the book is the man himself, Mzilikazi wa Afrika. Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, and thank you for inviting me.
A very emotive book. I had some of my team members point out to me, said, how can you put a black face on the book and then call it Nothing Left to Steal? Immediately the connotation is that black people steal. How do you view that?
I happen to be a black man on the cover of my book, so there's nothing, there's no connotation to it. So.
That's what I was trying to tell the guys, but you can't, in a way, I suppose, you can't get away from this kind of thing. But tell us about the motivation for the memoir and how you went through this difficult process.
See, the book is just like a chronology of my professional career with a little bit of myself, where I come from, who am I, and the road I went through to be where I am today, Basically, when the stories is out there in the newspaper, people read the story, they don't know what happened behind the scenes, what exactly journalists or editors went through, legal threats, death threats, and all of that. So the book is capturing exactly what I went through, or me and my team, when we're investigating certain issues we went through to give the public the final product, which is what they read in the newspaper.
You at that time dealing with a very tender subject in South Africa. It was around corruption, the police commissioner and so forth. You were even locked up within this process. Tell us about that, and then how do you view that particular moment in our history?
I mean, someone was mischievous and someone sent the police to arrest me, and that was an unfortunate incident, because at the end of the day, taxpayers were at loss because I sued the state successfully. And for an issue that should have been avoided, ignored, but because someone thought they can abuse their power by sending police to arrest me for no apparent reason, just to show off they are in charge, you know. The issue again is we've got platforms in South Africa. If you're not happy with the story, go to the press ombudsman. If you're not happy with it, you go to court, sue, and you get damages. But if issues are there, the truth is out there, why do we have to cover up the truth with lies?
Now, central to this story is, of course, the charismatic former police commissioner, Becky Cele. Have you seen the Bring Back Becky campaign that's been running on social media? How do you view that?
I mean, I'm just a journalist. I cannot be chanting slogans, bring back someone or get someone down. Basically, it's up to the president, it's up to the ruling party to decide if they want to bring him back. Surely they should bring him back, but then they will have suffer the consequences of the civil society, you know?
We're about to go to courtside, but I just want to have a final little bit of information. You're not only a journalist. I see that you're a songwriter, producer. Tell us a little bit about these things, and how does an investigative journalist that goes to jail for writing such tough stories, write songs and produce and all that sort of thing on the side?
I don't drink or smoke, so after work I go to my recording studio to detox. You know, that's why I sit down to unwind and writing songs, maybe being inspired by what happened during the course of the day. And I just happened to have that ear because I wrote my first song when I was 11 years old, and I came up with a song that became one of the top 10 songs around the world and house music, you know. Yeah. So I was inspired because I'm also motivated by what I see in life and by my conviction about life.
Well, Nzilikazi Africa, nothing left to steal. It deals with a very touchy story. The man spent some time in prison for that. I wish we could talk a little bit more, but Judge Thokozile Masipa is busy with the big story of the day. We are going to the North Gauteng High Court as she tells us her views on the appeals procedure in the Oscar Pistorius trial.
In my view, the degree of public interest in a particular matter is not relevant, and it cannot determine the outcome of any matter that is before court. In terms of our Constitution, everyone is equal before the law. It follows, therefore, that this application will be treated only on its own merits, not on the basis that the case attracted public interest. The second point was raised by the respondent in his opposition papers. In paragraphs 4 and 5, the following is stated, I quote, 4, for purposes of considering whether or not to grant leave, it is respectfully submitted that the test applicable to appeals, namely that a court may have proper regard to events that occurred subsequent to the passing of sentence, as long as the subsequent events are not in dispute, applies. 5, it cannot be in dispute that the parents of the deceased, and also through their legal representative, Advocate De Bruyn, SC, expressed their satisfaction with the sentence. It is a material factor, close quote. While there will be some instances where events that occurred subsequent to the passing of sentence might be relevant, this is not one of them. Counsel for the applicant readily agreed with this court that the views of the parents of the deceased on the sentence imposed on the accused are irrelevant. There was no counter-argument in this regard on behalf of the respondent. While I agree that a sentence imposed should do justice, not only to the community, but also to the parents of the deceased, in brackets CR versus Karj, spelled K-A-R-G, 1961, Volume 1, capital SA, 231, capital A in brackets. It seems to me that once a court has correctly exercised its discretion in imposing a sentence, the views of the public about the appropriateness or otherwise of the sentence are immaterial, and they cannot influence the outcome of an application for leave to appeal. Application in terms of Section 316, capital B, subsection 1. The grounds of appeal are set out in the application. In paragraph 2.9, the applicant concludes, quote 2.9, that there is a reasonable prospect that another court may come to a different finding with regards to the sentence imposed by this court and may in fact overturn the sentences imposed, close quote. Interference with a sentence on appeal is not justified in the absence of material misdirection or irregularity, or where the sentence imposed is not shockingly inappropriate as to create a sense of shock. The grounds as set out in the application suggest that all the requirements for the interference by an appeal court have been met. In none of the submission, however, by counsel for the applicant did I understand that there was a misdirection which was such that it could vitiate this court's decision on sentence. Although counsel for the applicant argued that the sentence was inappropriate and shockingly light for someone that killed an innocent person with gross negligence, where such conduct bordered on dolus eventualis, I am not persuaded that there was any material misdirection or irregularity, or that on the facts of this matter, the sentence imposed is shockingly inappropriate and induces a sense of shock. The application in terms of Section 316, capital B, subsection 1, therefore, cannot succeed. Application for the reservation of points of law in terms of Section 319. The questions concerned in this application have been summarized in the applicant's heads of argument as follows. I quote, 1. If the principles of dolus eventualis were correctly applied to the accepted facts and the conduct of the accused, including error in objecto, and or 2, whether the court correctly conceived and applied the legal principles pertaining to circumstantial evidence and or pertaining to multiple defenses by an accused. 3, if the court was correct in its construction and reliance on an alternative version of the accused, and that this alternative version was reasonably possibly true, and or 4, if the court correctly conceived and applied the legal principles pertaining to the possession of ammunition while not in legal possession of an arm to fire such ammunition, close quote. The grounds of the applications are set out clearly in the application, and it would serve no purpose to repeat them here. The application is opposed, and grounds of such opposition are also clearly set out in the respondents' opposition papers. The main point argued extensively by both counsel was whether the questions raised by the applicant in its application are questions of law or questions of fact masquerading as questions of law. There were, of course, other points argued by counsel for the applicant. However, the preliminary questions as correctly submitted by counsel for the respondent is whether or not the questions raised or the question raised is one of law or one of fact. Whether or not a question genuinely raises a question of law is not always such an easy question to answer. That this is in fact so was clear from submissions by counsel, who both argued ably and supported their submissions with case law. Also, see in this regard S. vs. Basson, 2007, Volume 1, capital SACR 566, in brackets, capital CC, close brackets, especially where the court in paragraph 12 refers to a Supreme Court of Appeal ruling that the admissibility of the bail record gave rise to factual issues and not questions of law, and struck such question from the roll, while the Constitutional Court's preliminary judgment held that the SCA had erred in this respect and that the question of the bail record did give rise to a question of law. In the present case, we are dealing with a matter which, as counsel for the applicant correctly submitted, is not an easy one. Counsel for the respondent sought to demonstrate to this court that there, in quotes, purported, close quotes, questions of law raised by the applicant were questions of fact, and that the attack was clearly aimed at the court's factual findings. Having perused the application, in brackets, especially inter alia paragraphs 12, 13 and 23, close brackets, and case law referred to, brackets, C. Mahmoud versus Janse van Rensburg and others, 1993, Volume 1, capital SA, 777, capital A in brackets, at pages at pages 781G and 799 respectively, close brackets, I have been persuaded that the questions in respect of count 1 as set out by the applicant are questions of law. That being so, I cannot say, after considering submissions by counsel, that the prospect of success at the Supreme Court of Appeal is remote. I am also of the view that if the points succeed, this might have a practical effect on the conviction. The application, therefore, in respect of count 1, falls to be decided in favor of the applicant. In respect of count 4, I am of the view, however, that the cases referred to by the applicant do not support his application for reservation of a question of law in terms of Section 319. The application in respect of this count, therefore, falls to be dismissed. Conclusion. In the result, in respect of the application, in terms of Section 316, capital B, subsection 1, the following order is granted. 1. The application for leave to appeal against sentence is dismissed. 2. It is ordered that the applicant pay the cost of the respondent in opposing the application to be taxed according to the scale in civil cases of the High Court as envisaged in Section 316, capital B, subsection 3. In respect of the application in terms of Section 319, I am satisfied that the points raised by the applicant in respect of count 1 are indeed questions of law. Accordingly, the following questions of law are reserved for the consideration of the Supreme Court of Appeal. 1. whether the principles of dolus eventualis were correctly applied to the accepted facts and the conduct of the accused, including error in objecto. 2, whether the court correctly conceived and applied the legal principles pertaining to circumstantial evidence and or pertaining to multiple defenses by an accused. 3, whether the court was correct in its construction and reliance on an alternative version of the accused, and that this alternative version was reasonably possibly true. And lastly, in respect of count 4, the application is refused. Ms. Johnson, before I adjourn, I believe there's something that you wanted to hand over.
A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. Governments here are working hard to ensure that the continent's technology matches that of more advanced countries.
High-speed internet connectivity is regarded as a utility.
As the continent battles diseases like Ebola, social media becomes the preferred method to share information.
People on social media are some of the society's most influential.
To find out more, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on SABC News.
Well, an interesting ruling there by Judge Thokozile Masipa in the North Gauteng High Court. On this very channel, we will look at it, analyse it, and repurpose it throughout the rest of the day. So stay with us here on SABC News. Judge Thokozile Masipa feeling that there's no grounds for appeal in this case, but we will get it together, and hopefully Griselda Lewis will be able to get the analysts and the experts in, speak to all the relevant parties, of course the prosecution and then the MPA, who've said that they will take it to the highest courts in the land if they don't get to appeal. Anyhow, that's where it is right now. That's where we wrap Newsroom today. The show, of course, broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following day. We're also live on YouTube during that time with the show available on demand on our YouTube channel. You're watching SABC News. This is Newsroom. We love it in the morning.